I got my wife pregnant in high school. My parents kicked me out. Get out. You've disgraced us. I raised my son alone with my wife for 18 years. They showed up years later. Let us see the child. When I opened the door, but what they heard shocked them. What child? What are you? Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was some kind of genius at 17. I was basically a walking disaster with a learner's permit and count 'em, three, chin hairs that I was genuinely proud of. I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror every morning checking on those bad boys like they were investments in my future masculinity. Pathetic? Absolutely. But that was me. A kid who thought facial hair was the peak of adulthood, blissfully unaware that real grown-up problems were about to body slam me into next week. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where nothing interesting ever happens, when Talia barged into my room without knocking. Now, Talia was my girlfriend, had been for about 8 months at that point, and she was the kind of girl who could rock a band tee and ripped jeans while simultaneously maintaining a 3.8 GPA. Smart, beautiful, way out of my league if we're being honest here. But for some reason, she decided I was worth her time, and I wasn't about to question that miracle too closely. Except this particular Tuesday, she didn't look like herself at all. Her face had gone completely white, like she'd just witnessed a murder or seen her search history projected onto the school gymnasium wall. She was clutching something in her hand, holding it out toward me like it was a live grenade, and honestly, that would have been less terrifying than what it actually was. A pregnancy test, with two very red, very definite lines. For a second, and I'm talking maybe 0.5 seconds here, my brain just straight up refused to process what I was seeing. It was like when you're playing a video game and the graphics glitch out, and you're just standing there staring at a frozen screen thinking, is this real? Did this actually just happen? But yeah, it was real. Those two lines weren't going anywhere, and neither was the baby they represented. Boom. Just like that, my entire life detonated like someone had dropped a nuclear bomb directly onto my teenage existence. I want you to understand something. Up until that moment, my biggest worry had been whether I'd scrape together enough money to buy new sneakers before school started. I was worried about acne. I was worried about whether Talia would want to go to prom with me. You know, normal stupid kid stuff. And now, suddenly, I was staring down the barrel of fatherhood before I could even legally buy a lottery ticket. We must have stood there for a solid 5 minutes, just looking at each other, both of us frozen like those people in Pompeii, except with more existential dread and less volcanic ash. Finally, Talia whispered, "What are we going to do?" And honestly, I had absolutely no freaking clue. My brain had left the building. Elvis had exited the premises. There was nothing upstairs but elevator music and the faint smell of panic. But here's the thing about being young and stupid. You think your parents are going to help you. You think, okay, this is bad, this is really bad, but surely the adults in my life will step up and guide me through this nightmare, right? They'll yell, they'll be disappointed. Maybe I'll get grounded until I'm 30, but eventually, they'll come around. They have to. That's what parents do. Yeah, about that. When we told my parents that evening, and let me tell you, that was the longest walk down the hallway of my life. I genuinely thought my dad was going to have an aneurysm. His face went through about 17 different shades of red, cycling through the entire anger rainbow from mildly irritated crimson to fire engine fury to something that probably doesn't even exist in nature. My mom just sat there on the couch, completely silent, staring at us like we'd just told her we'd joined a cult and sold all her jewelry to fund our escape to Mars. Then my dad stood up, and I swear to God, it was like watching a volcano that had been dormant for years suddenly remember how to erupt. He slammed his fist down on the dining room table so hard that the pitcher of iced tea literally cracked right down the middle, sending liquid everywhere like some kind of dramatic movie scene, except this was my actual life, and there was no director yelling, "Cut. Get out." He roared, and I mean roared. The neighbors 3 houses down probably heard him. "You've disgraced this family. You've disgraced yourself. I will not have this under my roof." I tried to say something, tried to explain or apologize or literally anything that might make this situation less catastrophic, but he wasn't having it. He pointed at the door like he was banishing a demon, and his hand was shaking so badly, I thought he might actually be having a stroke. My mom still hadn't said a single word. She just sat there, mannequin still, staring at some invisible point on the wall behind us. And you know what? That silence hurt worse than all of Dad's screaming combined. It was like she'd already erased me from her mental family portrait. So that was it. Game over. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Do not pretend you still have parents who love you. I went upstairs. Correction, I basically sprinted upstairs because I could feel the tears coming, and I'd be damned if I was going to give them the satisfaction, and started throwing whatever I could grab into my old duffel bag. Jeans, a couple of hoodies, some socks that may or may not have matched, my sketchbook, because I'd literally rather die than leave that behind, and the phone charger that was probably the most valuable thing I owned at that point. My little sister Kara appeared in my doorway while I was packing. She was only 12, still young enough to not fully understand what was happening, but old enough to know it was bad. Really bad. She had tears streaming down her face, and when she hugged me, I felt something inside my chest crack open like that stupid tea pitcher downstairs. "Why do you have to go?" she whispered into my shoulder, and I didn't have a good answer for her, because "your brother knocked up his girlfriend, and now everyone's pretending he's dead," seemed a little too heavy for a 12-year-old to carry. "I'll be okay," I lied, squeezing her tight. "I promise I'll be okay." 20 minutes later, I was standing on the front porch with my pathetic duffel bag, watching my dad close the door in my face. Talia was next to me, also crying, and we both looked like we'd just survived a plane crash, except the plane was our lives, and the crash site was everywhere. And you know what the worst part was? The absolute cherry on top of this disaster Sunday. I didn't even get to finish the meatloaf at dinner. My mom makes this incredible meatloaf. Made, I guess, past tense now, with this glaze on top that's equal parts sweet and tangy, and I'd been looking forward to it all day. I'd taken exactly 3 bites before the world imploded. I got kicked out faster than yesterday's leftovers, and I didn't even get to enjoy today's. How rude is that? Standing there on that porch, 17 years old with 3 chin hairs and a baby on the way, I realized something. Childhood doesn't end gradually. It doesn't fade out like a song on the radio. It detonates. It explodes. And when the smoke clears, you're standing in the rubble wondering who the hell you're supposed to be now. Spoiler alert, I had absolutely no idea, but I was about to figure it out real quick. So there we were, 2 teenage idiots with a baby on the way and exactly nowhere to go. I'd like to tell you that we had some kind of brilliant plan, that we sat down and mapped out our future with color-coded spreadsheets and realistic financial projections, but that would be a massive lie. Our plan consisted of, don't die, don't let the baby die, and maybe eat something that isn't ramen once a week if we're lucky. Groundbreaking stuff, really. We should have written a self-help book. Talia's Aunt Denise turned out to be our unlikely savior, which was hilarious because I'd met the woman exactly twice before this disaster, and both times she'd looked at me like I was a suspicious package left unattended at an airport. But apparently, blood is thicker than water, or maybe she just felt bad for us. Either way, she offered us her basement apartment. And when I say apartment, I'm using that term extremely loosely, the way you might call a hot dog a sandwich or refer to my dad as a supportive parent. This place was basically a concrete box that someone had slapped a door on and called it a day. We're talking a basement that had seen better decades. Probably around the time disco was still cool and people thought bell-bottoms were a good idea. The walls were that depressing gray color that you only see in prison documentaries and government buildings that haven't been renovated since the Cold War. The floor was cracked concrete that was cold enough to double as a meat locker, and there was this charming mildew perfume that hit you the second you walked in, like the building itself was slowly decomposing and wanted you to know about it. The crown jewel of our new palace? A vent in the corner that hissed constantly like a tired, asthmatic dragon who'd given up on life somewhere around 1987. I'm talking a steady, wheezing sound that never stopped, not even at 3 in the morning when you're desperately trying to sleep. It was like living with a geriatric Darth Vader who had a 2-pack-a-day habit and emphysema. Our furniture situation was equally depressing. We had a futon, and I use that term generously, that Denise had probably rescued from a curb somewhere in the late 90s. This thing squeaked if you looked at it wrong. If you blinked too hard, it squeaked. If you thought about sitting down, it squeaked preemptively. Forget about any kind of romantic moment. This futon was like having a judgmental chaperone made of metal springs and disappointment. Every move we made came with a full sound effects package, which was about as sexy as you'd imagine. We also had a mini fridge that hummed louder than a heavy metal concert. a microwave that only worked if you held the door closed with your foot while it was running. Don't ask me why. I don't make the rules. And a card table that wobbled so badly we had to shove folded napkins under one leg just to eat, without everything sliding onto the floor. Living the dream, people. Living the actual dream. But here's the thing. We made it work. Because what other choice did we have? Complain? To who? The mildew? The hissing vent? God himself, who clearly had a wicked sense of humor when he designed my life. I needed a job, and fast, because babies are expensive and apparently they don't accept good intentions as payment at hospitals. I hit up every place within walking distance. And yeah, walking distance, because my car had died 2 weeks before I got kicked out, which was just the universe's way of saying, hey, you're not struggling enough yet. I applied to fast food joints, gas stations, retail stores, anywhere that would take a desperate teenage dropout with zero experience and a sob story that could make a grown man weep. Finally, I landed something at Morrison's Hardware, this old-school store that smelled like sawdust and broken dreams. The owner was this guy named Cliff, and let me tell you, Cliff had the personality of a brick wall, and I'm talking one of those brick walls that's been weathered by years of disappointment and cheap beer. I've seen DMV workers with more enthusiasm. I've seen funeral directors who were cheerier. This man smiled approximately never, gave one-word answers to everything, and looked at me like I was personally responsible for all of society's problems. But you know what? Cliff gave me a job. Minimum wage, no benefits, hours that made me want to weep, but it was a paycheck. And a paycheck meant diapers, meant formula, meant keeping Talia and the baby alive. So I showed up every single day, learned the difference between about 17,000 types of screws that all looked identical to me, helped middle-aged dudes find the right-size drill bits, and pretended that my feet didn't hurt so bad I wanted to amputate them. Meanwhile, Talia kept going to school because that girl is tougher than anyone I've ever met. Picture this. She's walking through the hallways of our high school, belly growing bigger every week, headphones permanently glued in her ears to block out the whispers and stares, and she's still pulling decent grades. While our former friends were worrying about prom dresses and college applications, she was calculating due dates and researching how to install a car seat properly. The look she got. Man, I wanted to fight every single person who side-eyed her. You know the look I'm talking about. That judgmental, holier-than-thou expression that says, I would never be that stupid, without them having to open their mouths. Teachers, students, random people at the grocery store. Everyone had an opinion about the pregnant teenager in the produce aisle. But Talia held her head up and kept moving forward, and I fell more in love with her every single day for that. Our diet was absolutely tragic. I'm talking dollar menu nuggets that tasted like cardboard mixed with regret, instant noodles and flavors that definitely don't exist in nature. What even is Oriental flavor supposed to be? And whatever was on sale at the discount grocery store, where everything was approximately 2 days away from expiring. We became experts at stretching $5 into 3 meals. We learned which fast food places gave you free water and which ones acted like you'd asked for liquid gold. We discovered that if you buy the store brand everything and don't care about taste, nutrition, or your will to live, you can survive on about $30 a week. Romance in our basement kingdom was different. Forget candlelit dinners or movie dates or any of that normal couple stuff we used to do. Our version of romance was me holding Talia's swollen feet while she studied for her chemistry exam, whispering encouragement like, "You got this, Mrs. Future Nobel Prize in surviving on cup noodles." It was her falling asleep on my shoulder while we watched pirated movies on my cracked phone screen. It was splitting the last packet of instant ramen even though we were both starving, because that's what you do when you love someone and you're both equally broke and desperate. Some nights, after she'd fallen asleep and I was lying there on that squeaky futon from hell, staring at the water-stained ceiling and listening to our dragon vent wheeze away, I'd think about my old life. My actual bed with the memory foam mattress. My mom's cooking. My sister's laugh. The fact that I used to complain about being bored, like boredom was the worst thing that could happen to a person. I'd give anything to be bored again. But then Talia would shift in her sleep. Her hand would rest on her growing belly, and I'd remember. This was my life now. This basement, this job, this girl, this baby. No do-overs. No reset button. Just survival, one day at a time, $1 menu meal at a time, one squeaky futon night at a time. We survived. That's what we did. We survived in our basement kingdom with our mildew perfume and hissing dragon and wobbly table. And somehow, impossibly, we found moments of happiness in all that concrete and cold. Looking back now, I realize those might have been the realest moments of my entire life. I'd taken a night shift at this sketchy warehouse about 2 weeks before Talia's due date because, surprise, surprise, we needed the money. The job was mind-numbing. Moving boxes from point A to point B like some kind of human forklift. But it paid an extra $2 an hour, and those $2 meant the difference between name-brand diapers and the store-brand ones that leaked like a broken dam. So yeah, I was there at 2:30 in the morning, half asleep on my feet, contemplating the meaninglessness of existence while stacking boxes of who knows what, when my phone started vibrating so hard it nearly fell out of my pocket. 3 missed calls from Talia. For texts, each one more panicked than the last. And then the 5th one, in all caps, water broke. Hospital. Now, I'm pretty sure my soul left my body for a solid 10 seconds. You know that feeling when you're dreaming that you're falling and you wake up with that jolt? Imagine that. Except you don't wake up because you're already awake and the falling sensation is actually your entire life accelerating toward fatherhood at about 90 miles per hour. I didn't even tell my supervisor I was leaving. I just dropped the box I was holding, heard something inside shatter, whoops, sorry capitalism, and bolted for the exit like the building was on fire. I'm talking full-on Olympics sprinting through a warehouse at 2:30 in the morning, dodging forklifts, and jumping over pallets like I was training for American Ninja Warrior, Teenage Parent Edition. Pretty sure I set a personal record getting to the parking lot. The bus ride to the hospital was absolutely agonizing. Public transportation at 3 a.m. is its own special kind of hell. It's just you, the bus driver who's seen way too much, and a collection of characters who look like extras from a zombie movie. I was sitting there vibrating with anxiety, checking my phone every 5 seconds like the updates would come faster if I just stared at the screen hard enough. Talia's aunt had taken her to the hospital, thank God, because if I'd had to be the one driving while she was in labor, we probably would have ended up in a ditch somewhere with me having a full-scale panic attack. When I finally burst through those hospital doors, I must have looked absolutely insane. I was sweating, out of breath, wearing my warehouse uniform that smelled like cardboard in desperation, and I'm pretty sure I had this wild-eyed expression that screamed, first-time father having a complete mental breakdown. The nurse at the desk took one look at me and said, "Labor and delivery?" without me even having to ask. Apparently, I had that look. They directed me to the 3rd floor, and I took the stairs because waiting for an elevator felt like it would take 17 years. By the time I found Talia's room, my legs were burning, and I was pretty sure I was having a heart attack. But none of that mattered because there she was, my girlfriend, the mother of my child, looking simultaneously more beautiful and more terrifying than I'd ever seen her. Labor, as it turns out, is not like the movies. There's no soft lighting, no gentle music, no heartwarming moment where everything is calm and beautiful. It's chaos. It's pain. It's nurses rushing around checking monitors and saying medical terms that sound like they're speaking an alien language. And it's Talia gripping my hand so hard I was genuinely concerned she might break bones. I'm talking a grip that could crush diamonds. A grip that made me understand what real pain feels like, and I wasn't even the one having the baby. "Where were you?" she gasped between contractions, and I could tell she was trying to be angry, but the pain was kind of overriding everything else. "I'm here now," I said, because what else could I say? "I'm sorry I work nights to pay for our lives," felt a little too heavy for the moment. The hours blurred together after that. I've never experienced time moving so slowly and so fast at the same time. Every contraction felt like it lasted forever, and then suddenly we'd been there for 3 hours, then 4, then 5. I kept telling Talia she was doing great, that she was strong, all the stuff you're supposed to say, but honestly, I felt completely useless. She was doing all the work, literally all of it, and I was just standing there like a cheerleader with no pom-poms, trying not to pass out every time I accidentally looked at what was actually happening. And then, at 3:17 a.m. on a random Thursday in March, everything changed. The doctor said, "One more push," and Talia made this sound that I'll never forget. Part warrior cry, part primal scream, part something that doesn't even have a name. And then suddenly there was crying. Not her crying. A baby. Our baby. Crying his tiny lungs out. announcing his arrival to the world like he owned the place. They placed him on Talia's chest, and I swear to God, time just stopped. Everything stopped. The beeping monitors, the rushing nurses, my own heartbeat. Everything went silent except for this tiny, angry, absolutely perfect little human who was covered in all kinds of stuff I'm not going to describe, but who was somehow the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. "It's a boy," someone said, and I was crying. Like, ugly crying. The kind of crying where your face gets all scrunched up and your nose runs, and you can't form actual words because your brain has short-circuited from the overwhelming reality of what just happened. I was crying like a baby while looking at a baby, which felt very meta and philosophical, but was mostly just me being a complete emotional wreck. Micah. We decided on the name weeks ago, lying on that terrible squeaky futon, scrolling through baby name websites on my cracked phone screen. Talia had said it meant, "Who is like God?" And I'd said, "Let's just hope he's like us, but with better decision-making skills." And she'd laughed and said, "Deal." They let me hold him after they cleaned him up and did all the medical stuff they do. A nurse basically had to teach me how, because I was holding my arms out like I was about to receive a package of extremely fragile china. And she was like, "Relax, he's not going to explode." But honestly, he felt like he might. He was so small, so impossibly small, and I was suddenly very aware of how big and clumsy my hands were. These hands that had stacked boxes and scraped paint and done absolutely nothing important for 18 years were now responsible for keeping this tiny person alive. Micah looked like me. That was the first thing I thought. He had my nose, poor kid, and what looked like it might be my eye shape, though it was hard to tell because newborns kind of just look like angry old men who are upset about being evicted from a warm apartment. But there was something in his face, some indefinable thing, that was definitely mine. Proof that I'd contributed something to this world besides mediocre test scores and disappointment. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, and my voice cracked like I was going through puberty again. "I'm your dad. I know I have no idea what I'm doing, but I promise I'm going to figure it out. We're going to figure it out together, okay?" He just stared at me with these unfocused newborn eyes, probably thinking, "Who is this giant crying person, and when can I go back to sleep?" But I didn't care. In that moment, holding my son for the first time at 3:17 in the morning in a hospital that smelled like disinfectant and new beginnings, I felt something shift inside me. Some fundamental change in who I was as a person. We brought him home. Well, back to the basement. The next day in a car seat we'd borrowed from one of Talia's cousins. The whole ride back, I kept checking the rearview mirror every 5 seconds like Micah might spontaneously combust if I wasn't constantly watching him. Talia was exhausted, moving slow, and I felt this overwhelming wave of protectiveness for both of them that was almost scary in its intensity. That first night in the basement with our newborn son was something else entirely. Micah did not care about our need for sleep. He did not care that we were exhausted. He cried, and we walked laps around that damp concrete floor like zombies in a horror movie, taking turns bouncing and shushing and praying for just 5 minutes of silence. I tried singing lullabies, and I mean really tried, gave it my all, but I'm tone deaf and the songs came out sounding like a dying cat had learned to speak English. I'm pretty sure even the cockroaches in the walls filed a noise complaint. But Micah didn't seem to care. He'd eventually calm down, fall asleep on my shoulder, and I'd just stand there in our terrible basement at 4 in the morning, swaying gently, thinking, this is my life now. This is everything. Turns out, nobody tells you that having a baby is basically signing up for a hostage situation where the hostage taker is 8 pounds, can't speak English, and communicates exclusively through blood-curdling screams at 2 in the morning. Welcome to parenthood, kid. Here's your complimentary eye bags and a lifetime supply of anxiety. Our life became a blur of diapers. So many diapers that I'm convinced Micah was somehow producing more waste than he was consuming, which defied all laws of physics, but whatever. Dollar store wipes that were about as gentle as sandpaper and microwaved mac and cheese that we ate standing up because sitting down felt like a luxury we couldn't afford time-wise. Sleep became this mythical thing we'd heard about once, like Atlantis or my dad's approval. It existed in theory, but never in practice. The basement apartment, which had already been pretty depressing, now looked like a disaster zone. There were baby clothes hanging on every available surface because our dryer, was literally just hoping things would air dry in our humid cave before they developed sentience. Bottles were everywhere, clean ones, dirty ones, half-full ones that we'd forgotten about, and were now growing cultures that could probably cure diseases or start new ones. The futon had graduated from squeaky to biohazard, because babies are basically tiny poop factories with surprisingly poor aim. But here's the thing that got me. Micah's crib situation was absolutely tragic. We'd gotten this hand-me-down crib from somebody's garage sale. Pretty sure it was older than me and had definitely seen better decades. And it sat in the corner of our basement next to a wall that had this lovely brown water stain that looked like either a map of South America or a Rorschach test for depression. Every time I looked at it, I thought about all those nursery pictures you see online, you know? The ones with the cute themes and matching furniture and walls that aren't actively weeping with moisture. So I decided to do something about it. I'd always been decent at drawing. It was literally the only class I didn't fail in high school, and I still had my art supplies stuffed in a box under the futon. One night, after a particularly brutal shift at the hardware store where Cliff had yelled at me for approximately the 50th time about properly organizing the nail bins, like the fate of Western civilization depended on nail organization, I came home and just started painting. I painted stars, hundreds of them, all across the ceiling above Micah's crib, spreading out like somebody had spilled a bottle of light across the concrete. Some were big and bright, some were small and distant, and I even did that Milky Way thing where it looks like dust scattered across space. It took me 3 nights, working after Micah finally passed out, my neck cramping up like crazy, paint dripping on my face, but I finished it. And you know what? It looked pretty damn good. Sure, our ceiling still leaked and our walls were still sad, but at least Micah would have something beautiful to look at. At least he'd dream big, even if we were living small. That was the hope, anyway, that somehow, despite this basement and our broke existence and the fact that his parents were basically kids themselves, he'd look up at those stars and think anything was possible. Talia cried when she saw it. Good tears, not the exhausted, overwhelmed tears that had become pretty standard around our place. She stood there holding Micah, looking up at the ceiling, and whispered, "You're gonna be a good dad." And man, I needed to hear that. Because most days I felt like I was failing at literally everything. Work was killing me. I was pulling double shifts whenever Cliff would let me, which was often, because that man would rather die than pay overtime to 2 people when he could just grind 1 person into dust, and my body hurt everywhere. I'm talking the kind of tired where your bones hurt, where you're so exhausted that you forget what you were saying mid-sentence and just stand there with your mouth open like a broken robot. I'd come home at weird hours, collapse on the futon, and wake up 20 minutes later because Micah needed something or Talia needed help or the dragon vent was hissing particularly aggressively that day. Money was tighter than my jeans from freshman year. We had a jar, a literal jar, like we were living in a Depression-era movie, where we kept our emergency money. I'm using quotes because it was usually around $15, which would maybe cover an actual emergency for about 6 minutes. Every purchase was a calculation. Did we need groceries, or could we stretch what we had for another day? Could we afford to turn the heat up, or should we just pile on more blankets? Was that weird noise Micah was making normal baby stuff, or take him to the doctor and go bankrupt stuff? The social aspect of our lives had basically died a quiet death. Remember those friends I mentioned? The ones we used to hang out with, play video games with, do normal teenage stuff with? Yeah, they stopped calling pretty much immediately. At first, they'd text, asking if we wanted to come to parties or go to the movies or whatever, and we'd have to be like, "Can't. We have a baby." And eventually they just stopped asking. Can't really blame them. What 17-year-old wants to hang out in a basement watching their friend change diapers when they could be out doing literally anything else? There was this one time. I remember it specifically because it stung so bad when my buddy Marcus posted pictures from his birthday party. Everybody was there. Everybody from our old group, laughing and having fun, and I was sitting in the basement at 11 p.m., trying to get Micah to stop crying while eating cold mac and cheese straight from the pot. Marcus and I had been tight since middle school, and he hadn't even told me about the party. Just didn't invite me. Because I wasn't one of them anymore. I was the cautionary tale. The don't end up like him example that parents probably use to scare their kids into abstinence. And you know what? It was fine. No, seriously, it was fine. Did it hurt? Absolutely. Did I feel left out and forgotten? and like my entire social circle had collectively decided I was dead to them. 100%. But I also didn't miss it as much as I thought I would. Because yeah, they were playing video games at 2 in the morning, but I had my own boss-level challenge, surviving colic. Who needs Call of Duty when you've got Call of Diaper Duty? Who needs to fight zombies on a screen when you're fighting actual exhaustion in real life? My life had become this impossible game that I couldn't pause or quit, and the stakes were way higher than any video game could ever be. Talia was struggling too, but in different ways. She was still trying to finish high school, still trying to pretend like she was a normal student when nothing about our situation was normal. She'd come home, back to the basement, and immediately switch into mom mode, taking Micah so I could shower or eat or just stare at the wall for 5 minutes without anyone needing anything from me. We tag-teamed everything. She'd sleep while I did the night shift, I'd sleep while she handled mornings, and somehow we survived on about 4 hours of sleep each per day. But there were good moments. Man, there were good moments that made all the terrible stuff worth it. Like when Micah first smiled. A real smile, not just gas, though we'd been fooled by gas smiles approximately 60 times before the real one happened. He looked right at me, and his little face just lit up like I was the greatest thing he'd ever seen. And I swear I took about 400 pictures before Talia told me to chill. Or the time I was feeding him a bottle, and he grabbed my finger with his tiny hand, and I just sat there thinking about how something this small could completely reshape your entire existence. How this little person who couldn't even hold his own head up yet had more power over my life than anything else ever had. Those gummy smiles, man. Those made everything worth it. The exhaustion, the poverty, the isolation, the fact that I'd essentially given up my teenage years before they'd really even started. All of it became bearable when Micah would look at me and smile like I'd hung the moon. Which was ironic, because I'd only managed to paint some stars on a ceiling, but to him, I guess that was enough. We were 3 musketeers in that basement. 3 broke, tired, occasionally smelly musketeers who were just trying to survive one day at a time. And somehow, impossibly, we were doing it. We were making it work with dollar store wipes and microwave dinners, and a ceiling full of painted stars that promised better things ahead. At least, that's what I told myself at 3 in the morning while walking circles around concrete floors, holding my son, dreaming of sleep. Somewhere between Micah's first birthday and his second, I can't pinpoint the exact moment because those years blurred together like a time-lapse video of exhaustion. Something shifted inside me. Like, fundamentally shifted. It wasn't one of those dramatic movie moments with swelling music and a sudden realization. It was quieter than that. Sneakier. The kind of change that happens so gradually you don't notice it until one day you look in the mirror and realize you're not the same person who got kicked out of his parents' house with 3 chin hairs and a duffel bag. The moment I remember most clearly, the one that really drove it home, happened on a random Tuesday afternoon. Micah was about 2.5, at that age where kids are basically tiny drunk people who can walk, but probably shouldn't be trusted with anything breakable. I'd managed to scrape together enough money to buy some cheap finger paints from the dollar store because I'd noticed him getting interested in the sketches I'd do during my breaks at work. He'd point at my drawings and say, "Dad," which was his catch-all word for literally everything. But I could tell he was curious. So there we were on the concrete floor of our basement kingdom, and I'd spread out some old newspapers because I'm not completely stupid. I knew this was about to get messy. I opened the paints, showed Micah how to dip his fingers in, and then basically braced myself for the chaos I knew was coming. And chaos came, all right. This kid went absolutely feral with those paints. I'm talking finger paints everywhere. On the newspaper, on the floor, on himself, on me, somehow on the ceiling, even though I still don't understand the physics of how he managed that. He was having the time of his life, just smearing colors around with this look of pure concentration on his face, like he was Picasso creating his masterpiece. Which, okay, I know it's Picasso, but Micah plus Picasso equals Picasso, and I'm sticking with it. I started out trying to control the situation, trying to keep the paint contained, wiping up spills immediately, being all responsible and dad-like. But then I noticed something. Micah kept stopping to look at me. Every few seconds, he'd pause his paint destruction and glance up, checking to see what I was doing, how I was reacting. And it hit me like a freight train made of responsibility and terror. He wasn't just playing with paint. He was watching me, learning from me. Every reaction I had, every word I said, every move I made. He was absorbing all of it like a tiny sponge made of eyeballs and judgment. That's when I stopped scrubbing frantically and just let it happen. I sat back, grabbed a piece of paper, and started painting with him. And his little face just absolutely lit up. He started babbling in that toddler language that sounds like someone speaking English underwater, showing me his artwork, which looked like a crime scene, but which he was incredibly proud of. And I realized something huge. This wasn't about the paint. This was about me being present, actually being there, not just physically but mentally and emotionally. Up until that moment, I'd been operating on survival mode. Get up, go to work, come home, take care of basic needs, sleep if possible, repeat. I was going through the motions of being a parent, but I wasn't really being present for it. I was so focused on not dying, on keeping us afloat financially, on making sure the bills got paid and Micah had diapers, that I'd forgotten to actually be with him. To see him as a person and not just a tiny responsibility machine. That paint-covered afternoon, something clicked. I stopped feeling like a dumb kid who'd gotten in over his head and started feeling like a dad. Not someone playing the role, not someone faking it until he makes it, but an actual father. It sounds cheesy as hell, and if you'd told me at 17 that I'd have some kind of spiritual awakening while covered in dollar store finger paint, I would have laughed in your face. But there it was. After that day, things changed. I started paying more attention, really paying attention, to the little things. The way Micah's face scrunched up when he was concentrating. How he'd hold his arms up and say, "Up peas," when he wanted to be picked up, and how that never got old even when my back was killing me. The way he'd fall asleep on my chest, his little hand clutching my shirt, completely trusting that I'd keep him safe. That trust, man, that trust was heavier than anything I'd ever carried at the warehouse. I'd been doing some sketches in my spare time, which was basically non-existent, but I'd steal moments here and there, and one day Talia suggested I show them to someone at the community center down the street. There was this art program they ran, and they were looking for instructors. Now, I'd never taught anything in my life. I barely had my GED, but Talia had this way of believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself, so I figured what the hell, why not get rejected by one more institution? Except I didn't get rejected. The director, this older woman named Ms. Patricia who had the kind of energy that made you want to either hug her or be terrified of her, looked through my portfolio. And by portfolio, I mean the sketchbook I'd been doodling in since high school, and said, "When can you start?" I almost fell out of my chair. Start what? Teaching. We need someone to run the Saturday morning kids art class. It pays, not much, but it pays. You interested? Was I interested in getting paid to do something I actually enjoyed instead of moving boxes or organizing nails for a man who communicated exclusively in grunts? Yeah, I was interested. That's how I ended up teaching art to a bunch of kids at the community center every Saturday morning, and I brought Micah with me because childcare was expensive and also because he loved it. He'd sit on a stool next to my desk, his own little paper and crayons in front of him, pretending to be an instructor too. The other kids thought he was hilarious, this tiny kid trying to show them how to draw when his own drawings looked like abstract representations of chaos. Watching him in that environment, surrounded by creativity and other kids and possibility, I realized I was giving him something I'd never really had: encouragement. My parents had never told me I was good at art. They'd never put my drawings on the fridge or bragged about me to their friends. Art was a waste of time to them, something I should grow out of, not something to nurture. But I could be different. I could show Micah that creativity mattered, that making things with your hands and your imagination was valuable, that he could be whoever he wanted to be. One Saturday, we were working on a project about families, and I asked the kids to draw their family portraits. Micah, who was now 3 and had the confidence of a tiny CEO, went to town on his paper with crayons. When he was done, he proudly showed me his masterpiece: 3 stick figures that I assumed were him, me, and Talia, and this killed me, a huge smiling sun that took up literally half the page. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing to the sun. "That's the happy," he announced, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Not the sun, the happy. Because to him, happiness was this big, bright thing that shined on all of us. And I thought about our basement apartment with its mildew smell and cracked floors, about the struggles and the poverty and all the things we didn't have, and realized that despite everything, this kid was happy. We'd given him that. Somehow, impossibly, We'd created a happy kid in the least happy circumstances. The other instructors at the community center started asking me for advice on teaching techniques, and I wanted to laugh because what did I know? I was making this up as I went along, just like I'd been making up fatherhood as I went along. But maybe that was the point. Maybe none of us really know what we're doing. Maybe we're all just trying our best and hoping it's enough. Cliff at the hardware store had noticed the change in me too, though he'd never admit it out loud because that would require him to express a human emotion. But he started giving me slightly better shifts, slightly more responsibility. One day, he even grunted something that might have been good job, but could have also been indigestion. It was hard to tell. I started carrying myself differently, standing up straighter, speaking with more confidence. Because I wasn't just some kid anymore. I was Micah's dad. I was the person responsible for shaping a whole entire human being. That's terrifying. Yeah, but it's also kind of amazing when you think about it. Talia noticed it too. One night, after Micah had finally passed out and we were doing our usual routine of collapsing on the futon in exhaustion, she looked at me and said, "You know what? You've become a really good dad." And I wanted to deflect, to make a joke, to do that thing I always did when someone gave me a genuine compliment. But instead I just said, "I'm trying." "I know," she said. "That's what makes you good at it." That transformation from boy to dad wasn't marked by some certificate or ceremony. There was no official moment where someone knighted me and said, "Congratulations, you're now a real father." It happened gradually, in moments covered in finger paint and Saturday morning art classes and bedtime stories read in different voices until my throat hurt. It happened in the decision to be present instead of just surviving. To see parenting not as something that happened to me, but as something I was actively choosing to do well. I was Micah's dad, not a kid with a kid, his actual father. And somehow, that made all the difference. 5 years. 5 entire years had passed since I'd been kicked out of my childhood home. And in that time, I'd basically accepted that my parents had written me off like a bad investment. I'd made peace with it. Or at least, I'd shoved it into a mental box labeled "things that hurt too much to think about" and stuck it in the back of my brain's closet. Life had moved on. Micah was thriving. Talia and I had scraped our way up from the basement to an actual apartment. Still small, still cheap, but with windows that opened and floors that didn't leak. And I was teaching art classes while working part-time at a better hardware store with a manager who occasionally smiled. We were doing okay. Not great, but okay, and honestly, that felt like winning. Then the envelope showed up. It was a Tuesday. Why is it always Tuesday when life decides to get complicated? And I was sorting through the mail, which was usually just bills and grocery store coupons and those credit card offers that make you feel simultaneously important and insulted. But there, sandwiched between the electric bill and an ad for pizza delivery, was a letter with handwriting I recognized immediately. My dad's handwriting. That rigid, perfectly controlled penmanship that looked like it had been typed by a very uptight robot. Every letter perfectly formed, slanting at exactly the same angle, the kind of handwriting that screamed, "I iron my socks and have strong opinions about lawn maintenance." My hands started shaking. Like, actually physically shaking, which was embarrassing because I was a grown man, 22 years old, a father, someone who'd survived on his own for half a decade. And a simple envelope was making me react like I'd just seen a ghost. Which, in a way, I had. A ghost from a past life that I'd tried really hard to forget. I stood there in our tiny kitchen. And when I say tiny, I mean you could touch both walls if you spread your arms out, which Micah found hilarious and did approximately 60 times a day, just staring at this envelope like it might explode. Talia came out of the bathroom, took one look at my face, and said, "What's wrong?" I couldn't even speak, just held up the envelope so she could see the return address. Her eyes went wide, and she said the only thing that made sense, "Oh shit." Yeah, oh shit indeed. I didn't open it right away. I put it on the counter, made dinner, helped Micah with his coloring book, did the dishes, took out the trash, reorganized the junk drawer, basically did everything possible to avoid dealing with that envelope. Talia didn't push me, which I appreciated. She just let me process, watching me with those eyes that said, "I'm here when you're ready," without having to say it out loud. Finally, after Micah was asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of our secondhand refrigerator, I opened it. My hands were still shaking, and I felt like I was defusing a bomb made of emotional trauma and paternal disappointment. Inside was a check A check for $5,000. $5,000. More money than I'd seen in one place since, ever, actually. I'd never had $5,000. I'd never even been close to $5,000. The most money I'd ever had at one time was maybe $300, and that felt like winning the lottery. And underneath the check was a note, written in that same rigid handwriting. We should talk. We want to make things right. Please call. Dad. I stared at that note for what felt like an hour, but was probably more like 5 minutes. We want to make things right. 6 years too late. But sure, now they wanted to make things right. Now, after I'd figured everything out on my own, after I'd survived and thrived without them, after I'd become the person I needed to be with zero help from the people who were supposed to help me, now they wanted to talk. The check felt heavy in my hand, and not in a good way. It felt like hush money, like guilt money, like, here's some cash so we can pretend we're not terrible people money. Nothing says sorry I abandoned my teenage son when he needed me most, quite like a $5,000 bribe, right? I wanted to rip it up. I really did. My first instinct was to tear that check into a million pieces, mail them back, and include a note that said something really clever and cutting that would make my dad feel like garbage. But then reality kicked in. $5,000. That was 3 months of rent. That was fixing Talia's car that had been making that concerning noise for 6 months. That was Micah's preschool tuition paid in full. That was not eating ramen for the first time in forever. What are you going to do? Talia asked softly from the couch. I don't know, I said, and I hated how uncertain my voice sounded. Part of me wants to tell him where he can shove this check. But $5,000 is $5,000. She finished for me because she got it. She always got it. I don't want his money, I said, even though that wasn't entirely true. I did want his money, or more accurately, I wanted what his money could do for us. I just didn't want the emotional strings that came attached to it, like psychological barbed wire. We sat there for a while, not talking, just thinking. Finally, Talia said something that cut through all my anger and resentment and confusion. If you answer him, don't do it for him. Do it for Micah. And damn, that hit different. Because she was right. This wasn't just about me and my hurt feelings and my justified anger. Micah had never met his grandparents. He'd ask about them sometimes, especially when he'd see other kids with their grandparents at the park or the community center, and we'd have to do this awkward dance of, well, it's complicated, buddy, without saying, they're awful people who abandoned us. Did my parents deserve to know Micah? Hell no. They'd given up that right when they kicked me out. But did Micah deserve to have grandparents? Maybe. Did he deserve the chance to decide for himself one day what kind of relationship he wanted with them? Probably. I thought about my dad's note. We want to make things right. The thing is, you can't make something like this right. You can't undo 6 years of absence with a check and a phone call. You can't fix abandonment with money. But maybe, and this was a big maybe, you could start something new. Not fix what was broken, but build something different from the rubble. So I wrote back. Not a phone call. I wasn't ready for that level of interaction, but a letter. I sat down at our wobbly kitchen table at midnight, with Talia asleep on the couch and Micah snoring softly in his room, and I wrote, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about my son. His name is Micah. He's 5 years old. He likes painting and dinosaurs and asking why about everything. He's smart and funny and kind, and he's the best thing I've ever done with my life. If you want to be part of his life, you need to understand that you're not coming back into mine. You're starting fresh with his. And if you hurt him the way you hurt me, we're done. Forever. This is the only chance you get. Don't waste it." I didn't mention the check. Didn't thank them for it. Didn't acknowledge it existed. I honestly wasn't sure if I was going to cash it yet. That felt like accepting their apology, and I wasn't ready to do that. Maybe I never would be. I mailed the letter the next day, and then I tried to forget about it. Tried to focus on work and Micah and the life I'd built without them. But it was there, in the back of my mind, this quiet anxiety about what would happen next. A week later, another envelope arrived. This time from my mom, and her handwriting was less rigid, more curved. The kind of handwriting that looked like it came from an actual human with emotions instead of a disappointed robot. Inside was a photograph, me at maybe 10 years old, sitting at our old kitchen table, completely focused on a painting I was working on. I remembered that day vaguely. I'd been painting a sunset, trying to get the colors just right, and I'd been so absorbed in it that I'd forgotten about everything else. On the back, in my mom's handwriting, I never threw it away. I never threw any of them away. And just like that, the armor I'd been wearing for 6 years cracked just a little bit. Not broke. I wasn't ready for that, but cracked. Because that photo, that note, that tiny admission that she'd kept pieces of me even after kicking me out, it complicated things. It made them human again instead of just the villains in my origin story. My sarcastic brain wanted to say something cutting, something like, "Congratulations, you can keep receipts. Want a medal?" But my heart, that stupid, hopeful, desperate to believe in redemption heart, whispered something different. Maybe there's still something there. Maybe people can change. Maybe it's worth finding out. I showed the photo to Talia, and she smiled sadly. "That's you," she said, touching the image of 10-year-old me, completely lost in creating something. "That's still you." I looked at the photo, at that kid who loved art and believed in possibility, and I thought about Micah in his art class, tongue sticking out in concentration, creating his own masterpieces. I thought about cycles and patterns and the choice to break them or continue them. "What do you think I should do?" I asked Talia. "I think you should do whatever you need to do," she said. "But remember, you don't owe them anything. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, nothing. If you want to explore this, do it on your terms. For yourself and for Micah. Not for them." She was right. She was always right, which was both annoying and incredibly helpful. I put the photo on our fridge, right next to Micah's latest masterpiece. A family portrait where everyone was smiling and the sun was shining and everything was perfect in that way that only exists in a 5-year-old's imagination. And I waited to see what would happen next. Just when I thought my life had reached its maximum capacity for awkward family drama, the universe decided to throw me a curveball wrapped in fancy cardstock and tied with a ribbon of emotional complications. My phone rang on a Saturday morning. I was making pancakes with Micah, who was helping by getting flour absolutely everywhere except in the bowl, and the caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in years. Lucas, my brother-in-law. Well, technically he was married to my sister Kara, which made him my brother-in-law, though we'd only met like twice before the whole exile situation went down. I almost didn't answer. My finger hovered over the decline button because I'd learned that nothing good comes from unexpected calls from family members who've been radio silent for half a decade. But curiosity, that stupid, powerful force that makes humans do dumb things, got the better of me. "Hello," I said, trying to sound casual while simultaneously preventing Micah from dumping the entire bag of flour on the floor. "Hey man, it's Lucas." His voice was weird, nervous, overly friendly, like a telemarketer trying to sell you something you definitely don't want. "I know it's been a minute, but I wanted to reach out personally because, well, I'm getting married. To Kara, obviously. I mean, you knew we were together, right? Anyway, we're having a wedding, and well, Kara really wants you there. And your family. We want to meet Micah." I literally stopped moving. Just froze mid-pancake flip like someone had hit pause on my life. The pancake fell back into the pan with a sad splat, and Micah looked up at me with concern because even at 5 years old, he could tell when something was off. "You want me at your wedding?" I said slowly, making sure I'd heard correctly. Me. The family disgrace. The son who got kicked out and hasn't been invited to a single family event in 6 years. "Yeah, I know it's complicated." "Complicated?" I laughed, and it came out way more bitter than I intended. Micah was watching me with those big eyes, so I tried to dial back the sarcasm. "That's one word for it." "Look, I get it," Lucas said, and I could hear him taking a deep breath like he was preparing for a speech he'd rehearsed. "But Kara misses you. Like, really misses you. And your parents, they want to meet Micah. They've been asking about him." Oh, now they wanted to meet him. Now, after 6 years of pretending we didn't exist, after 0 birthday cards, 0 phone calls, 0 acknowledgement that they had a grandson, now they were interested. How convenient. How absolutely perfect that their sudden interest coincided with a big family event where they could show everyone how progressive and forgiving they were. I must have been quiet for too long because Lucas kept talking, filling the silence with more words that were probably meant to be comforting but just made me angrier. "It would mean a lot to Kara. She talks about you all the time. She wants to meet Talia properly, and she's dying to meet Micah. She's his aunt, you know? And she's missed so much already." That hit different. Kara, my little sister who'd hugged me goodbye when I got kicked out, who'd cried because she didn't understand why I had to leave. She'd been 12 then. She was 18 now, getting married, living a whole life that I knew nothing about. And whose fault was that? Not hers. She'd been a kid. She hadn't had a choice. I need to think about it, I said finally, because I couldn't process this conversation while simultaneously making pancakes and preventing a flour explosion. The wedding's in 6 weeks, Lucas said quickly. I'll text you the details. Just think about it, okay? For Kara. He hung up before I could respond, which was probably smart because I wasn't sure what I would have said. I stood there in our kitchen, spatula in hand, pancake burning in the pan, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Daddy, the pancake is smoking, Micah pointed out helpfully, and yeah, it definitely was. I scraped it off and started over, but my brain was somewhere else entirely. That evening, after Micah was asleep, I told Talia about the call. She listened quietly, doing that thing where she processes information by organizing the junk drawer, nervous habit she developed over the years. When I finished, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What do you want to do? She asked. I want to tell them all to go to hell, I said honestly. I want to send back a card that says congratulations on remembering I exist, but no thanks. I want to. But you're not going to do that, she interrupted gently. But I'm not going to do that, I agreed, sighing. Because Kara doesn't deserve that. And because I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Because I was curious? Because part of me wanted to show them what they'd missed? Because despite everything, some small, stupid part of me still wanted my family back? The next few weeks were weird. The wedding invitation arrived in the mail, fancy cardstock, calligraphy, the whole 9 yards. It was addressed to the family of my name, which felt both inclusive and insulting at the same time. Like they were acknowledging we existed but couldn't quite bring themselves to write out all our names individually. Micah found the invitation and asked about it, because of course he did. Kids have a radar for things you don't want to explain. What's this? He asked, holding up the fancy card. It's an invitation to a wedding, I said carefully. Your Aunt Kara is getting married. I have an aunt. His eyes went wide with that special kind of kid excitement that makes everything seem more magical than it actually is. Will there be cake? Weddings have cake, right? Can I wear my dinosaur shirt? You cannot wear your dinosaur shirt to a wedding, buddy. Will they like me? He asked suddenly, and my heart just broke. Because that was the question, wasn't it? Would they like him? Would they see what an incredible kid he was? Or would they just see the evidence of my teenage mistakes? They're going to love you, I said, hoping it was true. You're pretty lovable. He beamed at that, completely unaware of the complex emotional minefield we were about to walk through. To him, it was just a party with cake and the exciting prospect of meeting new family members. He didn't know about the exile, the abandonment, the years of silence. And I wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. I talked to Talia again that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, a much nicer ceiling than our old basement, but I still sometimes missed those painted stars. We should go, she said before I could even bring it up. Not for your parents. For Micah. And for Kara. What if it's a disaster? I asked. What if they're terrible to him? What if? Then we leave, she said simply. We walk out with our heads held high, and Micah will have learned an important lesson about standing up for yourself. But what if it's not a disaster? What if this is the beginning of something good? I wanted to tell her she was being naive, that people like my parents didn't change, that this was just going to end in more hurt and disappointment. But looking at her face, seeing the hope there mixed with caution, I realized she wasn't being naive. She was being brave. And if she could be brave, maybe I could too. We go as a family, I said finally. All 3 of us. And if anyone makes you or Micah feel like you're not wanted, we're out. No second chances. Deal, she agreed, squeezing my hand. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been given no second chances when I messed up, but here I was, considering giving them one. But that was the difference, wasn't it? I could choose to be better than they were. I could choose to let Micah know his family, even if that family had failed me. I could break the cycle instead of continuing it. 2 weeks before the wedding, I dug out the one blazer I owned from high school. I'd worn it exactly once, to some awards ceremony where I definitely didn't win any awards, and it had been sitting in the back of our closet ever since. I tried it on and immediately regretted it. The thing barely fit. My shoulders had gotten broader from years of physical labor, and the sleeves were too short, making me look like I was either growing rapidly or had stolen clothes from a smaller person. You look like a bouncer at a kid's birthday party, Talia said, trying not to laugh. That's the look I'm going for, I deadpanned. Intimidating yet festive. She helped me find something better at a thrift store, a suit that actually fit and only smelled slightly like mothballs. Micah got a little button-up shirt and clip-on tie that he was extremely excited about. We looked at ourselves in the mirror, me in my thrift store suit, Talia in a dress she'd borrowed from a coworker, Micah in his tiny formal wear, and we looked like a family. A real, actual family that belonged at weddings and normal events. We can do this, Talia said, adjusting my collar. We can do this, I repeated, trying to convince myself. Micah just grinned, completely unaware that we were about to walk into what could either be a beautiful reconciliation or a complete disaster. In his world, we were just going to a party with cake. And honestly, I envied that simplicity. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my head. What I'd say to my parents, how I'd react if they were cold to Micah, whether I'd be able to keep my cool if they said something that crossed the line. I'd survived 6 years without them. I'd built a life, raised a kid, become a man. I didn't need their approval anymore. But man, a small part of me still wanted it. And that was the scariest thing of all. The venue was one of those places that made you immediately aware of how much money you don't have. We're talking crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. Marble floors so shiny you could see your reflection judging you for being poor, and flower arrangements that were definitely more expensive than our monthly grocery budget. Lucas's family had money. Like real money. Not, we can afford name-brand cereal sometimes, money, and they'd gone all out for this wedding. It was the kind of place where you instinctively whisper even though there's no reason to, where you're afraid to touch anything, because it probably costs more than your car. Walking through those massive doors with Talia and Micah felt like entering enemy territory. My heart was doing that thing where it beats so hard you can feel it in your throat, and my palms were sweating so badly, I had to keep wiping them on my thrift store pants. Micah, blissfully unaware of the emotional warfare about to unfold, was fascinated by everything. The big chandelier, the fancy carpet, the ice sculpture shaped like a swan that he was convinced was real and just sleeping. Can we take the swan home? He whispered loudly, because 5-year-olds haven't mastered the concept of actual whispering. No, buddy, the swan lives here. I whispered back, scanning the room for familiar faces and simultaneously hoping I wouldn't find any. But then I saw them. My parents. Standing near the entrance to the main hall. Greeting guests like this was their wedding instead of Kara's. My dad looked older. Grayer, more tired, like the last 6 years had actually affected him, which was somehow both satisfying and sad. My mom was wearing a dress that probably cost more than our first month's rent in the basement, her hair done up in that way that screamed, I spent 3 hours at a salon. And she was smiling at guests with a warmth she'd never shown me after that night. They hadn't seen us yet. We could still leave. Turn around, walk out, pretend we'd never come. Tell Micah the Swan had invited us to a better party somewhere else. But then Kara spotted us, and her face just lit up like Christmas morning, and there was no backing out now. She practically ran across the lobby, and I realized my little sister wasn't little anymore. She was 18, wearing a bridesmaid dress, all grown up and beautiful, and living a life I knew nothing about. The guilt hit me like a truck. Not my fault, but guilt doesn't care about fault. I'd missed 6 years of her life. 6 years of her growing up, graduating middle school, starting high school, becoming this person standing in front of me. You came, she said, and her voice cracked. And then we were hugging, and she was crying, and I was trying not to cry because I was supposed to be the tough older brother who had his life together. Of course I came, I managed to say. Wouldn't miss your big day. She pulled back and immediately dropped down to Micah's level, which made him take a step behind my leg because strange adults are intimidating when you're small. You must be Micah, she said softly. I'm your Aunt Kara. I've wanted to meet you for so long. You're very fancy, Micah observed, because that's what passes for a compliment when you're 5. Kara laughed, actually laughed, and I remembered that sound from when we were kids. Thank you. You're very handsome. I love your tie. It's a clip, he informed her seriously, demonstrating how it worked. Real ties are too hard. Smart choice, she agreed. And just like that, they were bonding over clip-on ties while I stood there wondering how this was my life now. Then the moment I'd been dreading arrived. My parents had noticed the commotion, noticed Kara talking to someone, and now they were walking over. My dad's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, recognition, something that might have been joy or might have been gas. I couldn't tell. My mom just froze, literally stopped moving like someone had unplugged her, staring at us like we were ghosts made flesh. The silence was deafening. Like, you know those moments in movies where everything goes quiet and dramatic? It was exactly like that, except way more awkward and with more expensive flower arrangements in the background. Micah, blessed with the social obliviousness of childhood and the timing of a comedy legend, looked up at my parents and said, in the clearest voice possible, "Hi, I'm Micah. Are you my grandparents?" Boom. Mic drop. Game over. If there had been an actual mic, it would have shattered on that marble floor. My mom made this sound, kind of like a gasp and a sob had a baby, and her hand went to her mouth. My dad just stared, and I watched his face crack. Like actually crack. All that rigid composure just falling apart as he looked at his grandson for the first time. "Yes," my mom whispered, and she was crying now, full-on tears running down her expensive makeup. "Yes, sweetheart, we're your grandparents." "Cool," Micah said, because to him it was just cool. Not complicated, not emotionally charged, just cool. "This place is really fancy. Do you live in a castle?" My dad laughed. Actually laughed. I'd heard that sound maybe twice in my entire childhood, and here was Micah pulling it out of him in 30 seconds. "No, buddy, we don't live in a castle. But this is a pretty special place, isn't it? There's a sleeping swan." Micah informed him with the seriousness of someone delivering critical intelligence. "Made of ice. I wanted to take it home, but Daddy said no." "Well, maybe we can get you a picture with the swan," my dad offered. And then he looked at me, really looked at me, and said, so quietly I almost missed it, "You did good." And I don't know what I expected from this moment. Maybe I expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, like I could say damn right I did, and walk away with my head held high. Or maybe I expected to feel angry, to want to throw his words back in his face and remind him that he'd had no part in raising Micah, that he didn't get to be proud now after abandoning us when we needed him most. But what I actually felt was complicated. A messy tangle of anger and satisfaction and sadness, and something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness, though I wasn't ready to call it that yet. I looked at my dad, this man who'd kicked me out, who'd called me a disgrace, who'd missed 6 years of my life, and I didn't yell, didn't make a scene, just said quietly but firmly, "He's the best thing I ever made." Because that was the truth. Not, we made. Talia and I had done that together, obviously, but in that moment, facing my dad, I needed him to understand that everything good in my life had happened after he'd given up on me, that I'd succeeded not because of him, but despite him. My mom was trying to talk, but couldn't seem to form words, so she just kept looking at Micah like he was the most precious thing she'd ever seen. Which, fair, he was pretty precious, if I did say so myself. Talia stood next to me, her hand finding mine, squeezing it in that way that said, "I've got your back," without needing words. "Mom, Dad, this is Talia," I said, because apparently we were doing introductions now like this was a normal family gathering and not an emotionally charged reunion 6 years in the making. "My girlfriend. Micah's mom. Wife," Talia corrected gently, and oh yeah, I'd forgotten to mention that part. We'd gotten married at City Hall 2 years ago, just us and Micah and a witness who worked in the building. Nothing fancy, no big ceremony, just 2 broke kids making it official because we wanted to be a family in every sense of the word. "Wife," I corrected. "Sorry, my wife." My mom's eyes went to Talia's hand, to the simple band there that had cost $40 and meant everything, and she smiled. A real smile, not the social smile she'd been wearing earlier. "It's wonderful to meet you," she said, and she actually sounded like she meant it. Before anyone could say anything else, Lucas appeared looking stressed in that way only grooms on their wedding day can look stressed. "Guys, we need the wedding party for photos. Kara, they're waiting for you." Kara looked torn between her duties as a bridesmaid and staying with us, but I nodded at her. "Go, do the wedding thing. We'll be here." "Promise?" she asked, suddenly looking less like a grown-up bridesmaid and more like the 12-year-old sister I'd left behind. "Promise," I said. She hugged me again, quick and tight, then ran off with Lucas, leaving us standing there in this awkward family bubble. "The ceremony's starting soon," my dad said stiffly, and I could tell he was struggling with what to say, how to act. "You're welcome to sit with us. Up front. Family section. 6 years ago, I wasn't family. 6 years ago, I was a disgrace who needed to leave. But now, apparently, I was family again. Because we had Micah. Because they decided, on their timeline, that they were ready to acknowledge us. I wanted to say no. Wanted to tell them that you don't get to pick and choose when we're family based on what's convenient for you. But Micah was looking up at me with those big eyes, and Kara had just looked so happy to see us. And Talia was squeezing my hand like, "Your call. But think about what's best for Micah." And I realized that sometimes being the bigger person sucks, but you do it anyway. "Sure," I said. "Family section sounds great." As we walked toward the ceremony space, Micah between Talia and me, my parents following behind us like they weren't quite sure where they fit in this dynamic, Micah tugged on my hand. "Daddy," he whispered, "is this a castle?" I looked around at the chandeliers and the flowers and the ice swan and my family, who were strangers trying not to be strangers, and I thought about our apartment with its secondhand furniture and our painted stars on the ceiling and everything we'd built from nothing. "Nah, buddy," I whispered back. "This is just a fancy party. Our place is way better." And I meant it. At the reception, while everyone was distracted by overpriced chicken and an open bar, this guy named Gerard approached me. Turned out he was some art curator who'd seen my work at the community center, and he wanted Micah and me to display our art at an exhibit called Generations in Color. I nearly choked on my dinner roll because nobody had ever wanted to display my art anywhere except maybe the community center bulletin board next to the Lost Cat posters. Fast forward 3 months, and there we were, my portraits of struggle and survival hanging next to Micah's explosion of rainbow chaos and dinosaurs. My parents showed up, quiet but present, actually looking at our work like it meant something. My mom cried again, which was becoming her signature move. Then came the blast from the past nobody asked for. Ronan, Talia's high school ex, the guy who'd bailed the second things got real. He showed up in an expensive suit, acting important, trying to reconnect. Micah shook his hand politely, because we'd raised him right, but wasn't impressed. One awkward conversation later, Ronan left with his tail tucked. If awkwardness were currency, that man could have paid off our student loans. Months after the gallery exhibit, there was a knock at our door. My parents stood there looking nervous, like they were the ones who'd been abandoned. My dad's voice actually trembled when he said, "Let us see the child." I couldn't resist. Call it petty, call it therapeutic, but I opened the door slowly, put on my best confused face, and said, "What child? What are you?" Their faces drained of color faster than my phone battery ever did. My mom looked like she might actually faint, and my dad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For a glorious moment, I watched them panic, thinking I'd moved on completely, erased them from our lives the way they'd tried to erase me. Then I laughed, couldn't help it, and called Micah over. He came running, taller now, paint permanently under his fingernails, a mini-me in every way that mattered. "This one," I said, wrapping my arm around his shoulders. "But he's not just a child. He's my son, and the man you thought I'd never become." For once, my dad didn't slam a table. Probably because we don't own one worth breaking.